This is the I Read Comic Books podcast. I am your host, Mike Rappin. With me this week, two fantastic people and one very special guest. I'm here with Nick White.
Hey.
Paul Jasley.
Hello.
And the, I want to say infamous, Dave Baker.
Hello.
Dave, thank you guys so much for joining the show. Specifically, Dave, thank you so much for being on the show this week. Before we get into everything, could you tell us a little bit about yourself and just who you are for the people listening at home?
Yeah, so I'm Dave Baker. I'm a writer-illustrator. I live in Los Angeles. You might know my work from books like Fuck Off Squad, Action Hospital, Shitty Watchmen, Murders, a bunch of other comics, Star Trek Waypoint.
Okay.
Yeah.
Very cool. Well, Dave, we met you, I think we've met you before a couple times, but we talked to you at C2E2. We had a blast chatting with you just about your really cool comics that you had at your booth, and we figured we had to have you on the show. So thank you so much for being here this week. And we're going to get into the amazing stuff that we do every week, which is, I'm going to ask the question, how have you been? How have comic books been? Let's start with you, Nick.
Things have been good. The weather's finally turning around. Yesterday we had a ton of thunderstorms and hail and like downpours, and it's Michigan, so the possibility for snow is like still not off the table. Maybe in July we'll be able to say that for sure. We'll have to see. As for what I've read, probably one of the bigger books I've read recently is Fallen World #1. That's from Valiant. It's written by Dan Abnett, pencils by Adam Polina, colors by Ulysses Areola, and letters by Jeff Powell. For those unaware who have perhaps never listened to the show or aren't familiar with my very dumb views, I haven't entirely loved the most recent batch of Valiant books. And I guess if you want to sort of point to one of the few redeeming qualities of floppies in this world where people are like, we need to just move to all trades and all digital, and floppies are this archaic thing, they do at least allow me to sort of just dip my toes into the water from time to time and go, okay, well, here's like $3 or $4. Let's at least take a glance at this and make up my mind for sure whether or not this is something I don't, I'm not interested in. So I did that with Fallen World #1, and I have to say, it's probably the strongest title of the bunch. I probably would have pulled it if it wasn't for the fact that I'm sort of under a, like, only one new title a month policy right now to just keep my pull under control, and there was an Aliens title launching the same month, so it was like Sophie's Choice, except it wasn't really a choice.
Right.
I guess. That being said, like if you enjoyed Rye and you really enjoyed 4001 AD, you really owe it to yourself to pick this book up. It really does pick up pretty much all of the narrative threads from 4001 AD. So if you had any questions about how that was going to play out, it does a really good job. Dan Abnett, like, he did his work. It's not to say that some of these people come in and are just sort of like, punching in and punching out on the clock, but I think he did a fantastic job. Everybody's back, from Lula to Eternal Warrior to Father to all of the other characters that everyone listening to this show is going to go, I don't know who any of these people are. This doesn't mean anything to me. Please stop.
Nick, it means something to me. I read 4001. You got me. That's
okay.
all. This is the person you need to sell to. It's
Everyone
okay.
other than Mike, just ignore this.
Yes, please.
It's really interesting. Like, the 30-second synopsis would be, in Rye, there was this place called New Japan. It's this utopia in sort of an Elysium kind of way that exists, I think, several miles above the Earth. Except it turns out maybe things aren't that wonderful. Rye finds out that this AI called Father, which is running things, might be kind of corrupt, blah, 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 blah. New Japan comes crashing down into Earth. And so now you have all of these settlements of survivors trying to, I guess, continue to survive on this nuclear wasteland, if you will. It's really interesting. I enjoy that you've got 4001 AD Bloodshot effectively functioning as the sector's one-man police force, saving people from synthetic dinosaurs with 1990s Todd McFarlane styled guns, basically.
Great.
They're absolutely deranged. and then new Bloodshot. That's what I'm calling him, and just not NEW, just NU, like New Metal, New Bloodshot.
Right.
Finds Olmec from Legends of the Hidden Temple, who's like, hey, if you let me out of this cave, I'll help everybody. And he's like, yeah, that sounds like a wise idea with no repercussions because this is comics. And yeah, I'll leave it at that. The only other thing I want to just briefly mention that I read is BPRD 1946. I am slowly making my way through that book, or that series, rather. Like, my goodness, there's just so much of this. But this was a really interesting volume because you've got Mike Mignola co-writing with Joshua Dysart, which you don't generally find co-writers on these books with Mignola, and when you do, it's usually John Arcudi, so this was kind of a rare instance. And you've got Paul, I'm going to get this right because I looked it up, I swear, Paul Azaceta on art, who is perhaps most recently best known for doing Outcast with Kirkman, which was also really, really weird because it means that you also have Nick Filardi doing colors for him, which means you have a Dark Horse Hellboy book with no Dave Stewart, which is
strange. Very
it's like
strange.
in the 2 percentile. Like, it's got to be super rare. And I'm thoroughly enjoying that, if only because Paul Azaceta's pencils from 2008 look a lot like Jean-Paul Leon's pencils, which is not a bad thing. That is a very, very good thing. So, yeah, that's what I've been reading.
Gotcha. Well, I want to just find that spot where you mentioned New Metal, Nick, and I really just want to put a Disturbed soundbite in there.
Fuck you, Power Man 5000. I don't.
Anyway, sorry. So, Dave, let me ask you the question I ask everybody. How have you been? How have comic books been? Have you been reading anything good lately?
Yeah, I've been great, man. Working on my next book right now. Reading a bunch of comics as always. Recently, I've read, actually when I was in C2E2 when I saw you guys last, I got a free advanced reader's copy of the graphic novel Laura Dean Keeps Breaking Up With Me by Marco Tamaki and Rosemary Valero O'Connell.
Fuck yeah.
And I have been, it's an understatement to say that I have been salivating for this book for years. Like, I remember when it got announced and was just like, Tamaki and Valero O'Connell on one book, take me to there.
Absolutely.
And it did not disappoint. First Second has been putting out some really great comics. I really enjoyed. I enjoyed most of what they put out, but specifically, this book feels kind of like the spiritual sequel to This One Summer, which is another OGN that I really, really loved from whatever that was, 4 years ago. I kind of don't know, but yeah. So as the title would suggest, it's about a young girl dealing with an on-again, off-again relationship with a character named Laura Dean, who keeps breaking up with her. The layouts are great. Rosemary Valero O'Connell's anatomy is great. Mariko Tamaki, I think, is a writer who, when she's paired with the right artist, is exceptional. And other times, I think, like you were saying, sometimes people punch clocks. And, I think in that big two machine, it's really hard to do personal work, and this feels like very, very personal work. And it's nice to see two creators coming together with a common vision and making something that's both unique and very, very, very well executed. Like, even just the lettering in this book is really great because it's all done by Rosemary Valero O'Connell, and she draws all the balloon tails herself. So all of the characters' speech kind of has it's kind of hard to explain, but it feels like a Rosemary Valero O'Connell drawing, the way that she kind of tapers balloon tails and chooses when to have a long tail and when to have a short tail and where the balloon placement is. The book is great. I really, really, really love it. And I am excited that I have this weird advanced reader's copy because the collector in me is like,
Yeah, I read that pretty recently and I couldn't put it down. It was such a fantastic book. And currently, actually, right now in our Goodreads Book of the Month, it is in the tiebreaker moment between Captain America Volume 1 by Ta-Nehisi Coates and then Laura Dean Keeps Breaking Up With Me. And I'm like really crossing my fingers here, hoping that Laura Dean wins. As much as I want to read that Captain America run, like, that first second book, holy shit, it's fantastic.
Yeah, and also, does Captain America really need more help? Like, I love Captain America.
Yeah.
I love Captain America. It's great. I'm not shitting on it. I'm just saying, like, there's like 70 years of Cap comics, and I'm sure the Ta-Nehisi Coates stuff is great, but also Laura Dean breaking up with me should sell a bazillion copies. So I'm now casting my vote.
I was going to say, Dave, I think Mike is viewing this as an opportunity for you to join the Goodreads group and set things straight.
Yeah, he's proselytizing out in the streets. He's won me over because I love Laura Dean, and any opportunity to talk about cool comics by cool people. The other thing I read just briefly is Showa: A History of Japan by, and now it's my turn to butcher a name. I believe it's pronounced Shigeru Mizuki. But, being a manga nerd, I never actually know because I don't have anybody to talk about manga with. So I'm always like, I think it's this. I don't know. Anyway, it's a half autobiographical, half historical manga about, like it says, the history of Japan all through the Showa era. It chronicles from 1926 to 1939, and it's all about the economic crisis of the Showa period and the massive earthquake that basically set Japan back like 100 years. And the rise of the alt-right pseudo-fascist political party in Japan. And I didn't know any of it. It's pretty crazy. Like, there were apparently in Japan during this time period, because things were so bad financially, there was like a far-right, pseudo-Republican terrorist organization who would go around killing financial members of the government, like bankers and shit. Because they were so upset with how the Japanese government was handling the financial crisis. So anybody involved in banking was just had a massive target on their back, which is really fascinating. And it's crazy to see how everything from the 20s and 30s is kind of repeating itself now in terms of, massive financial fraud and natural disasters and governments maybe not acknowledging disasters in areas that are not vital to the day-to-day operations of countries. It's very, very interesting, and then it's all of that historical stuff is paired with, like I said, autobiographical comics about Mizuki's childhood and him growing up in Japan and basically being raised by a family friend, almost like this older kind of grandmotherly type character who took care of him because his dad left to try and work in the city to send home money, and his mom was always away working 7 jobs. So he kind of was raised by this older woman and obsessed with drawing, and it's very interesting. Yeah.
Sounds like it. You've hooked me. You've sold me. That sounds really cool, man.
I think Dave's put forward this summer's nice light beach read. It's it's the perfect thing to take with you as you sit out there sunbathing and
it's pretty wild too because obviously manga is produced on a different schedule than American comics, and obviously there's a bunch of assistants that help with producing the pages that you need to meet on a weekly deadline, and the assistant to mangaka ratio in Showa is very apparent. And it's actually something that I kind of like because you can feel, I think this is a kind of clumsy metaphor, but you can almost feel him being a director, like a movie where, there's, a crowd scene that's obviously referenced from a photo that he has literally not touched. There's no mark on that page that is made by him, but that he went into a studio and went up to an assistant and was like, trace this photo here. And there's something, it's just a completely different way of making comics that's very interesting to me. When I was younger, I probably would not have enjoyed it as much because I want to see the cartoonist's hand. I want to see them drawing. Right. And he does draw stuff, but it's really funny because you can see the discrepancy between what he draws because he has this very loopy, goofy style, and then 95% of the book, which is, photorealistic kind of look at me draw 75 blades of grass on this panel.
It's sort of you can actively see the collaboration, I think is that what you're saying? It's real apparent to sort of see how things come together.
Yeah, the delineation of roles is not camouflaged at all. It's very transparent of I don't give a shit about drawing this giant war scene. Here, 3 assistants, spend a couple of days drawing this thing, and then I'm going to write some words over the top of it.
Wow.
Yeah.
Very cool. Well, I mean, like I said, I think you sold me. I'm very excited to check this out. At least this is a pretty big book, then, right? I'm guessing you can't cover an entire period of Japan's history in 200 pages.
Yeah, I think it's multiple volumes. I have the first 2, and I've only read the first one, and each one is about 400 pages, and they take about approximately like 8 to 10 years a volume.
Gotcha. Very cool. Well, I just want to talk about this, but we got to move on. Paul, what have you? Paul, what have you been reading?
Paul,
How have you
it doesn't
been?
matter. No, it's
It's not. I mean, it's not nearly as interesting as that. I'll be honest. I've been comically behind on my weekly or monthly floppies here, so I just have stacks of comics I'm trying to make my way through. So I've been trying desperately to play catch up. That's what I've been doing this weekend, is just reading a bunch of recent comics that I'm behind on. I wanted to mention Justice League numbers 22 through 24. I read those, written by James Tynion IV, with Scott Snyder writing some of them. And then Francis Manipul's on issue 22, and then Jorge Jimenez on 23 and 24. This is big dumb superhero comics. I've kind of been burned out on that stuff, but for some reason these issues really clicked for me because it is just so it's so bonkers. You have the Justice League trapped in the 6th dimension. Meanwhile, Superman is trapped in a sunless prison so that he doesn't stop Batman from creating a utopia. Meanwhile, Batmite and Mr. Mxyzptlk are fighting each other in Metropolis. It's just bonkers, and I love it. But what I really enjoy about this Justice League series is that you have artists like Francis Manipul and Jorge Jimenez who are very idiosyncratic styles, and like I've always liked it when flagship superhero books have unique and different stylized artists on them. You know what I mean? Because Manipul's work does not look like anything else that DC does, really. That's, a flagship book like this. So, if it's building up to a big conclusion in issue 25 that's out this week. So, I don't know. I just really sort of had to turn my brain off and enjoy some dumb, fun comics, and those really hit the mark for me there.
Nice.
Speaking of which, dumb, fun comics, I read DCeased #1, which is, I avoided picking up initially because it just looked like DC's attempt to do like a Marvel Zombies type story where, where you just have zombies. But it turns out it's like a New Gods story, because in DCeased #1, you find out that Darkseid kidnaps Cyborg and then tries to use the Black Racer's power over death to extract part of the anti-life equation from Cyborg. And then it manifests itself into like a zombie infection. So Cyborg gets sent back to Earth, and he's basically patient 0. And the anti-life equation is being spread through social media, through like Wi-Fi signal. So the entire planet is being
like
infected.
Real life, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. It's a very obvious metaphor for how social media and phones have taken over. But it's also got Darkseid and Desaad and the Black Racer and Batman in it. So I'm enjoying it. I wouldn't have picked it up initially, but once I found out it was kind of like a backdoor New Gods story, I was all over it. So
very nice.
Again, second issue comes out this week. So I was oddly excited by some dumb, fun superhero stuff this week.
Good. Well, I'm glad you were able to start your summer off with some dumb, fun summer stuff.
Exactly.
Cool, man. Well, for me, I'm doing pretty well. I took all of Memorial Day weekend and just read every single physical book that I have. I mean, that's not true, but I read a lot. Mostly I just had all these collected editions, or I should say trades, or excuse me, I had these OGNs that I've just been sitting on, and they're all from First Second. Like, Dave's 100% right. First Second is putting out some knockout books, and it is incredible, the stuff that they're making. And I sat down and read a bunch of those, but and Paul and I recorded the last episode of our Doom Patrol series yesterday, which was awesome. Like, I don't mean to be like a total shill and plug our Patreon, but honestly, you should go support us on Patreon. Check out that series. The first 4 episodes are out, and it's amazing. We're going through every single issue of Grant Morrison's Doom Patrol and all the good times and bad times in that series. I can't get over it. I loved reading that entire series. So I finished Doom Patrol. That was one of the other things, but I also read Genderqueered. This is by Maya Kobabe. This is from Lion Forge Comics, and Kate talked about this on the show, I think last week or the week before, and I was like, oh, that sounds like a really cool idea for a comic. The idea of Maya Kobabe talking about their experience moving from a child who didn't understand their identity and what they wanted in life, and recognizing that, they identify as like a different sexuality than what people would expect. They're not. I'm trying to be proper here in using their correct pronouns, because the book is about understanding Air's journey from just this little girl to the person that they become. And I was really fascinated by this book. The art style is almost cartoony, and it's very bright, and it's really, really positive. I feel like the entire story from beginning to end is never trying to talk down to the reader or say, I can't believe you didn't know this. Or even when Kobabe faces issues in her life, like, I don't think it's ever met with the goddamn society is trying out to get me. It's mostly like, I didn't understand this, I didn't know what was going on, and here's how I figured it out. It's a very beautiful comic. The full title is Genderqueer, a memoir, because it's about Maya Kobabe's life from a very small person to the adult that Air have become. And I was really impressed. I cannot get over how fantastic this book was. I talked to someone via direct messages the other day on Instagram because they saw that I had posted about it, and we had this really interesting back and forth conversation that I'm very glad that I was able to have with someone talking about why books like this are super important and they need to be promoted as much as possible. And I think if you're someone who's out there who maybe doesn't have a full understanding of why people use different pronouns, or what why someone would go about doing something like that when it can be very challenging in society, this is a good example of a book that helps you understand that. And I don't think it's the end all be all to say, here's why people use different pronouns, because I don't think that's what this book accomplishes. But I do think it's a good example to say, here's one person's journey and how they got from I identify as a girl to I don't identify as a man or a woman, I identify as something else. I love this book. I cannot recommend it enough. There's some really fun bits. There's some really sad bits. I think that Kobabe's art approaches some very difficult topics in such a beautiful way that isn't there to make you feel weird. It's just to explain things very rationally from that person's perspective. I just cannot get over how good this book was. I read this in a sitting. I loved it so much. So highly recommend this to you guys if you guys get a chance to read it. But yeah, I guess we can move on, and we could talk about comics that we're excited for this upcoming week, because comic books are coming out on June 5th, 2019. What are you all excited for? Paul, I'm going to throw this back to you.
Well, Mike, I'm excited for The Green Lantern #8. This is the series that Grant Morrison is doing with Liam Sharp. This is a deeply, deeply weird comic, and I love it very much. I mean, I guess it goes without saying it is a Grant Morrison comic, so
yeah.
Therefore it's weird, but it's weird in a different way. I think I mentioned on the show before, it feels like a 2000 AD sci-fi story featuring Hal Jordan. And, there was the issue, I think it was issue 5, where you had Hal Jordan have to fight his way across a planet full of vampires. You had the last issue, issue 7, where Hal Jordan is trapped inside his own power ring with Mirwidden, who's the
what
sorcerer who's also trapped in the power ring.
I love this.
And then this issue, of course, features the reunion between Hal Jordan and Oliver Queen, the hard-traveling heroes, Green Arrow and Green Lantern. It's interesting because, as weird as the book is, Morrison is still referencing classic Green Lantern stories. I mean, there is a Silver Age story where a sorcerer gets trapped inside Hal Jordan's power ring, so he's referencing that in the previous issue. Obviously, there's the classic Denny O'Neil and Neil Adams hard-traveling heroes with Green Lantern and Green Arrow. So it's interesting that this book is sort of in the mainstream DC continuity. It kind of feels like it would have been, all-star Green Lantern if it had come out 10 years ago. You know what I mean? It's sort of
totally.
Tour through the history of the character and these different angles of it. And Liam Sharp's artwork is just fantastic. There's really no other book I can think of that looks like it. It's just such a unique style. It does have a very 2000 AD feel to it. So if you want some sort of bizarre sci-fi stuff, you don't need to know a ton about Green Lantern's history or anything. I think it is a pretty fun book just to look at and just have your mind blown every now and again by it. So I'm pretty excited for this next issue.
Very cool. Dave, what about you? Are you excited for any books that are coming out in the near future?
I mean, this is a little bit. It's not this week, but
Sure,
the
that's
thing
fine.
the thing that I'm most excited about is is old Jonathan Hickman's run on the X-Men.
You and me both, man. You and me both.
Like, I don't know how you guys feel, but recently I have not really gelled with what Marvel's been trying to do with the X-Men. Not against any of the specific creators. I just kind of haven't been liking a lot of the editorial direction for most of the X books, with some few exceptions. You know, I liked some stuff here and there. But more or less, the X-Men have felt kind of just sidelined and waylaid and forgotten. And to just even that preview image that they put out at C2E2, just that image alone, I was like, yep, it's sold. Whatever it is, take me to there. I don't know what that is, but I want it.
Yeah.
And the fact that the new, like, maxi series thing they're doing, like, all the issues are going to be double and triple sized, and just take me to there. I just want it so bad. It looks great.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I cannot be more excited for an X-Men series right now. It's impossible. They couldn't throw anything else out there that would make me more excited.
So here's my question, though. As someone that knows very little about the X-Men and really hasn't read much of it, would this be a good jumping on point? Like, I'm pretty excited, or I'm curious about the excitement for it, so I'm kind of tempted to jump on at this point.
Honestly, I cannot answer that because I don't know what the fuck it's about.
I mean, obviously it's not out yet, but I mean, I'm just curious if that's going to be something I should check out. So I go back and forth on Hickman. Some of the stuff I like, some of it doesn't work for me, but at least I'm curious enough to maybe dip my toes into that pool, so to speak.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think I probably am a little bit more positive on Hickman than you, and then I would say most of it works for me, but some of it doesn't. But even when it doesn't work, I respect the fact that dude is taking a swing. You know, he's always got a big idea that he's building shit around, and even if it doesn't necessarily work for me or come together, I always like the fact that he doesn't feel like somebody who does a book just for a paycheck, even when he's on 75 books. Like, every book has a specific stated purpose.
That's true. Yeah.
I don't know if you guys have listened to Kieran Gillen's podcast, Decompressed, but he did an interview, like an hour-long interview with Hickman after Secret Wars. And it's amazing because it's like zero fucks given level of Hickman. He's just like, I never want to work there again. Like, it was too much. And they just, like, shit talk Marvel's kind of, like, crank it out. It doesn't matter if it's good method of producing books. And it's a really interesting interview. And it sounded like that from that. Like, he was never going to go back again. And he's been doing a bunch of Hollywood stuff and a bunch of creator-owned stuff. And for him to actually come back and show run this thing, like, they must have given him so much money and just complete creative control. And him coming back alone is enough to get me to read it. But now him coming back with what we've seen and the artists that he's paired with, sold so hard.
Yeah, same here. To prevent us from going on just a 25-minute X-Men rant, because I absolutely will. I'm 100% there with you. I didn't realize that this mini-series, maxi-series they were doing was going to be extra-sized issues, which would explain why they're two 6-issue mini-series instead of 12-issue mini-series. But, like, holy shit. Like, yeah, I'm very pumped. Paul, I will report back to you when I get the first issues to let you know. I have a feeling, though, it's going to be like, hey, fuck all this continuity. We're going to be doing something else now, because I think that's what Hickman likes to do. But anyways, Dave, I will reach out to you when that first issue comes out as well, because I need someone else to talk to other than these schmucks.
Yeah, I'm totally.
Dave, when that first issue comes out, disconnect your phone. Go off the grid. Find a cabin in Maine, because that's the only way you're going to be safe from Mike.
Anyways, Nick, what about you? What are you excited for this upcoming week?
Well, I really should just honestly build like a bot or some automated program that's like, what's Nick's pick of the week? Is there a Matt Kint book out? Yes, there is. Well, then that's the pick of the week.
Right.
It's Black Hammer 45, number 4. This is the last issue. Story by Jeff Lemire. Script by Ray Fawkes. Pencils by Matt Kint. Colors by Charlene Kint. And letters by Marie Enger. This is the last issue of this series, and as the press release says, the Black Hammer Squadron comes face-to-face with the Nazis, the Soviets, and the aerial killer, the Ghost Hunter, in a final showdown to save the family at the center of the fight. So obviously this is, I don't know what's going on, but this is the second book I'm dealing with or bringing up this week after BPRD in 1946, where it's the Americans and the Russians both attempting to steal German secrets. So apparently that's a thing I'm interested in this week. I don't know how this issue could be any more insane than number 3. Honestly, there were some massively huge panel layouts going on that I don't usually see that scope and scale from Matt Kint, so I was kind of surprised. I don't know if Matt loved or hated drawing this issue as well, because it's just filled to the brim with mechs and planes and explosions and tanks galore. And for Black Hammer being a series that's obviously very meditative and reflective on the history of comic books and comic book tropes and eras and genres, and I know this seems like a no-brainer thing to say, this is like very, very much in the vein of like a 1940s war comic, like the tropes and everything going on. It works. I think it works really well. And honestly, the last splash page of number 3, really solid composition, probably one of my favorite Kint pages of all time. So for those of you who have enjoyed this series up until now, I think number 4 is going to be really exciting. Even if probably people that are looking for more continuity with the Black Hammer universe at large haven't quite seen that much of that, but I'm personally okay with that. Like, this isn't like Star Wars where every movie needs 18 Skywalkers and everybody's related. Like, it's okay to have characters who are not, immediately related to everything else we've seen. So I appreciate that.
Yeah, I've enjoyed this series so far. But just for lack of time, I'm going to just jump right into my pick for this week. I'm excited for Age of X-Men Prisoner X. So, sorry, Dave. Number 4. This is Vita Ayala with Herman Peralta, and the last issue had some very strange beats. But I think that this whole Age of X-Men thing is crumbling, so I can forgive a lot of like weird continuity issues, because I think Ayala has done a really good job of explaining some of that stuff away. To say like, yeah, like everything's falling apart because this whole thing that we're doing with Age of X-Men is really, really falling apart, coming apart at the seams very quickly. And if you're reading, any of the other Age of X-Men books, you totally understand that. But I think that Ayala they've done a fantastic job of writing all of the focal characters, Bishop, Beast, X-23, well, not X-23, Gabby, aka Honey Badger, for folks that are in the know and that stuff. They've done a fantastic job writing all these characters and really delivering their shock and awe as they start to see reflections back into what was the original 616. I think this book is probably one of the best of the Age of X-Men books, and I really look forward to reading more about this. And I just want to know, Peralta's art is fucking fantastic. From beginning to end in this series, I think every character is drawn in their best that they've ever been in a long time, and I think that his take on Bishop is the best that I've seen in a while, and I'm talking better than the Gary Coleman Electric Company look that he had. I don't know if you guys have seen that comparison, but it's definitely out there. I posted a link in the show notes, and I'll put it in the show notes for this, but if you haven't seen this, for a while, Bishop had a look that was clearly lifted off of this Electric Company photo of Gary Coleman as a train conductor, and this is what Bishop looked like for like 20 issues during an era of the X-Men. It's amazing. So I just want to say I'm loving this series, and I look forward to issue number 4 of Prisoner X. So that's me.
On the Bishop front, do you know who Bishop was originally modeled after, right?
I don't.
Larry Stroman, the X-artist. He had
really?
Yeah. Willis Portacio originally wanted Bishop to be Filipino. Marvel editorial said no. So then he drew him as African American, and he based him on Larry Stroman, who had a massive, like, Jerry curled mullet at the time.
That's
no
funny.
way.
No idea.
Okay. That's fantastic.
Yeah. Which is actually why in his first appearance he's wearing a jacket that has the Filipino flag on the back.
Man, Dave, could you just keep coming with the tidbits? I really like that. That's really fun.
Dave provided our The More You Know segment for today, so
thank you.
We're deeply indebted.
Do 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 do.
before we start our discussion this week with the fantastic Dave Baker, I have to remind everyone that we have a zine out. Don't forget, we make an amazing zine, and you can get it for free, the digital copy at least, at ircbpodcast.com/zine, or if you want to be just another fantastic human being, you could go to store.ircbpodcast.com and you can buy a copy of the 5th issue of the I Read Comic Book zine. We've got some really cool stuff in there, including a piece about why Paul thinks that Batman is a really optimistic person? Question mark.
Exactly.
It's a really great piece. There's a bunch of other stuff. Nick recounts his time going to C2E2, and there's a bunch of other really great things in there. So if you haven't had a chance, go to ircbpodcast.com/zine, and you can get a copy of that today on your phone or your computer, wherever you're listening. But anyways, let's get into things. Let's talk with Dave Baker. You've been here talking with us about comic books for a while. We had a really fun discussion about how you're a big history buff in the break when it comes to comics. I guess to get things started, so you're a big cartoonist. You've been doing stuff for a while. What got you into comic books, man?
Well, I guess the short answer is, as a kid, I kind of didn't understand the difference between prose books and books with pictures, and I was really obsessed with boy detectives. So
Nice.
My mom got me a bunch of copies of Tintin from the library.
Nice.
Nice.
And it's been downhill ever since. Yeah, I don't know. I just think it's the best medium ever created. I love it dearly, and for better or for worse, I've been slaving away in the in the trenches for a long time.
So what was the transition like to go from just a reader to an artist, or were you like as a little kid just like constantly drawing your own comics and stuff like that?
Yeah. I basically have always been drawing. As a kid, I made a bunch of weird comics for characters that I made up. I also made shitty X-Men fan comics.
Nice.
I think I started self-publishing seriously when I was like probably 16, 17. And I put out a couple books then. Then I put out 2 OGNs in college. And then started making my big kind of like, this is going to be my blankets style OGN, really, really, really long personal book. And it kind of just killed me. I got like 150 pages in and then was just like, this sucks. Not that the book sucks, just the process of making comics I was a little disillusioned with at that point. And I wanted to get paid to write, and no one wanted to do that. So I started writing movie stuff. I wrote for a commercial company for a while. I wrote for a film school, writing all of their infomercials for a while. And since then, I've written some feature films and some TV show episodes, and I've done a bunch of work for hire-y, crazy like Roger Corman movies where they're like, "All right, kid, you got 3 weeks to write this picture, see?" And and then I write the movie in 3 weeks, and it's terrible. But it doesn't matter. So I've been doing all that stuff the whole time, and probably about 4 or 5 years ago, I met Nicole Gu, who's my partner, and kind of fell in love with making comics again, and we've been publishing stuff ever since.
Gotcha. Yeah, I was going to say, I think I met the both of you guys last year before at Emerald City Comic Con. I picked up all 3 of the volumes I think that you had of the Fuck Off Squad and related books, and I grabbed your Fuck Stan Lee pin. I was very into the look and feel that you guys had, so I've been really digging it. Like, where did something like Fuck Off Squad come? I should stop talking and let Paul and Nick jump in, but I got all these questions in my head. I just got to know.
Yeah. So I make a book called Action Hospital. And the first volume of that is a bunch of intertwining stories. And I met Nicole at a gallery opening, and we became friends and kind of hit it off. And I was like, "Oh, you should make comics." And she was more of kind of like an editorial illustrator at the time. And she was like, "Well, I don't really know." And I was like, "No, come on, it'll be fun. It'll be short." And so I wrote like just a little 10-page thing for her to do in Action Hospital. And she really liked the end result of having a finished comic. So then we were kind of trying to figure out what are we going to do next? What's something that we can do that's maybe not tethered to this weird shared universe that I've created, something that would be just ours. And she was drawing this like skater girl kind of over and over again in her sketchbook. And I was like, "Oh, let's do a slice of life like romance comic, but about skaters." And that's kind of how the initial idea for Fuck Off Squad kind of gelled or whatever.
Very cool.
Yeah, I really enjoyed Fuck Off Squad. I picked up the the collected volume here. And I mean, obviously my first sort of impression was I got a very heavy like Love and Rockets vibe from it, since it's a book about relationships, and music and pop culture and stuff. But I really enjoyed the way that social media and music was presented in the book, because I think capturing those things in a visual format like comics is really tough. I mean, showing a band playing music in a silent medium is really difficult to portray the emotion and feeling there. And I think, whatever the division of labor there between you and Nicole is, you really captured that in that book. Some really amazing moments there. And the use of, text messages and Instagram, incorporating that stuff into a narrative, I really appreciate the way you kind of blend that stuff together.
Yeah, thank you. That means a lot. Yeah, I think for better or for worse, this is the kind of dumb shit that I spend my days thinking about, of like how to formally integrate mechanics into comics, and how like what are the shortcomings of the medium, and how can you use that as an advantage, or what are the upsides of the medium and how can you lean into them. And specifically the thing you're talking about, Nicole and I always call it the phone mechanic. I don't really know what else to call it, but we basically the books tend to have like a 9-panel grid to them, and she was working on one of the 9-panel grids at one point, and I walked by and looked at it, and I was like, the focal point of that page is the middle panel, and so we should have an actual cell phone as that panel, because the 9-panel grid, those panels are almost the shape of a cell phone, and then we could like have on the screen what the people are texting each other. And she was like, oh yeah, it could totally work. And then she was like, oh yeah, and then we could almost make a diamond shape. So like panels 1, 3, 6, 7, and 9 could all be panels. And then I was like, yeah, and then we could do an inverse of that. And so a lot of our conversations are like dumb formalist, like almost like the mathematics of comics, of like how something visually gets read by the reader. And that's something that the phone mechanic thing is, I think, something that a lot of people respond to, just because for better or for worse, God, phones are a part of our everyday life now.
Right.
I mean, I don't want you, I really don't think you should call it dumb, because that is the coolest fucking explanation I've ever heard in my life. Like that kind of stuff, what you just described is like the mechanics of a comic page. Like that takes a lot of brain power. Like I don't want you to cut yourself down, man. That's all I'm saying, because that's fucking cool stuff to me, dude.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I like I said, for better or for worse, this is what I spend my time thinking about. And I think a lot of the stuff in the book, as you mentioned, it's kind of like both of us, where there is a division of labor in that I'm the writer and she's the illustrator, but also it kind of doesn't necessarily work that way, because it's so much of a back and forth give and take. Like it's not Marvel style, like there is a full script with panel breakdowns in the beginning, middle, and end, but there's so much more that it would be hard to kind of codify that unless I was literally sitting there with the book and going, oh yeah, that idea was 100% Nicole, this idea was me, that idea was Nicole, because so much of the book is like her sitting there with the script and then being like, you know what, I feel like this would work better on a page turn, because this is a reveal and it needs to be on the top left hand, it needs to be on the left-hand page on the top of it, so that when you turn the page, it actually has impact, as opposed to bottom right. Or like, this page turn doesn't work. You wrote this splash page to be on the right-hand side. It needs to be on the left. In fact, in Fever Coast, by that point, Fever Coast is the third chapter of the Fuck Off Squad stuff. And at that point, Nicole and I had been making stuff together for so long that there were the sequence where Sanvi and Clark are like driving down the Pacific Coast Highway going to the beach. It's this kind of like very decompressed, somber, like wind in the hair kind of moment. And in the script, I think I literally just wrote, yeah, here, do some shit for like 2 or 3 pages. I know you know what this should be. It's just like sad and like hair blowing in the wind. And like all of the actual stuff that's depicted in those pages is like 100% her.
Yeah, it's funny. I was actually going to point to that moment because I really enjoyed that part of the story quite a bit. That you go from one page where it is, a scene of the ocean and a bunch of like smaller panels, and then the page reveal is like that double page spread of them in the car together. And it's a striking moment. And yeah, you can tell exactly what the emotion's supposed to be there without any words. It's a great sequence.
Yeah, and I think also like when Nicole and I met each other, we were both kind of in transitional phases in our lives. Both personally and professionally, we were both trying to figure some things out. And specifically for that book, the Fever Coast, like on the beach thing. I mean, I don't want to speak for her, but for me personally, like Nicole and I really became friends at this big kind of like, I guess a beach party, I guess is how you would describe it. It was like a bunch of our friends on the beach and there was like a fire pit. And there's something specifically about the kind of infinite potential of when you make a new friend or you meet a new person or a new group of people where it's this simultaneously like scary and exhilarating thing. And also there's something about like the yawning chasm of potential that is the beach and like ocean at night, where it gives you a sense of perspective. It's like looking at the stars and realizing that you're just this like blip in the cosmos, and it basically, it could be kind of soul crushing because nothing you do is going to matter.
Right.
But also at the same time, like you're only going to be here for a limited amount of time, so like live life and make it the most that you can while you're here. And that's, I think, that scene right there for me personally is that book in a nutshell. And also the kind of name Fever Coast that's the closest I could get to like having some sort of like verbiage that associates with that feeling. Like I feel like I'm rambling now. Does that make any sense?
Oh yeah.
No, completely. Yeah.
Absolutely. Nick, you want to jump in here? Because Paul and I are dominating now.
Well, it's okay. Like I haven't read Fuck Off Squad yet, mainly because of my aversion to swearing. I'm just kidding. I haven't read it yet, so I didn't want to weigh in on that. I mean, don't get me wrong. I'll talk about all sorts of other things I don't know anything about, but for some reason I didn't want to touch that. One thing I wanted to say, and I know this is the dreaded convention preface, but not really a question. This is just a comment. Right from the get-go, I just want to say thank you, Dave, for like right out of the front of the book in Action Hospital having a very clear and concise credits page which very explicitly lays out who did what for what issue. Like, it pisses me off endlessly so much when a book begins and it's like, these are the 3 people that wrote parts of it, and these are the 7 people that did art. We won't tell you where and when. You'll just have to figure that out yourself. And when you're like doing a podcast or when you're writing an article or when you're reporting about something and you actually care about getting that shit right, it's just so endlessly frustrating to see people not spell things out like you did there. So yeah, I know it's a small thing, but I totally appreciate that. So thank you for that.
I just appreciate the fact that you care about those things, because I think so often, and I think it's a cancer in comics journalism, although low-key comics journalism doesn't exist and it's kind of low-key dead, but whatever, moving on.
Right. Oh, yeah, that's exactly the point. I mean, we could have a whole discussion about how maybe people have destroyed that to a point that it's not even a thing, but
yeah. I mean, like CBR, Newsarama, comicbook.com, they're all just like slideshows that you like click through factoids and shit, and it's so frustrating.
Listicles, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Oh, God, yeah. But I think specifically the thing that's so irksome to me as both a writer and an illustrator is that people deserve credit for their work. And also it's not a movie. Like, there is no auteur theory of comics. Like, if you gave a Mark Miller script to Jeffrey Brown, that's going to be a fundamentally different thing than if you gave it to
Let's make
Brad
that happen.
Hitch.
I mean,
Right, yeah. But you know what I mean? Like, so many times people are just like, oh yeah, Ed Brubaker's Criminal. Like, what? I mean, I love that book. I like Ed Brubaker as a writer, but he's not that book. Like, that book is both of them. Mm-hmm. Like, right. It's so frustrating to me that the level of kind of writer dominance has gotten to the point where it's just like, oh yeah, so this guy spent 15 minutes writing a 20-page script, and this guy spent 3 weeks laboriously drawing it, but the guy who spent 20 minutes gets all the credit.
Right. And then even with the people who are, acknowledging the penciler or acknowledging the colorist or whatever, so many times you just want to sit down and have a conversation with those people where it's like, yes, this guy drew it, but there was an active collaboration and conversation with the writer. Like, the penciler doesn't exist just as a tool to evoke or bring about the writers. Anyway, you know all this, and it's just...
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree. 100%. We're now best friends. Let's go on a road trip together.
See, what's really interesting to me about all that is it's problematic in the like journalism sense where it's like they only credit the writer and artist, for instance, right? There's also colorists
If
and
you're
letterers
lucky.
and flatterers.
If you're lucky.
Yeah, if you're lucky. But that was the point that I'm getting to. Like, for instance, I tried to find as much information as I could about this Age of Apocalypse Prisoner X #4. And you know what? Every single page that is created by Marvel says Vida Ayala, Herman Peralta. That's it. I know there's an inker. I know there's a colorist in there somewhere, but I don't have the book in my hand to actually be able to say that. So in order for me to quote unquote do my reporting or to discuss it with you guys, that's the only credit I can give. It's such a bummer that like when it comes to some publishers, because this isn't true for all publishers, but a lot of times big two, they'll only cite like the writer and the penciler. They won't cite other people in their news articles. And then when the issue comes out, everyone gets their full credit. But it's just like, it's a bummer because if you're trying to talk about the color work in a book and you don't have a name, you just say ? Colorist. It's garbage. I think it's really interesting because I think when it comes to like smaller press stuff, usually the credit is very explicit. And I think Dave, I was actually going to try to segue into that. Like, is that something that you kind of go out of your way to do to make sure that there is clear recognition as to who's doing what in your books?
Yeah, I do. And also a lot of times I think it's kind of silly that writers get top billing.
Yeah.
So like in the books I do with Nicole, her name is over mine because I think it's just a simple time thing. Like the person who spends the most time making the book should have their name first.
Do you guys remember when DC was inverting that for, what were they calling those books? Like the New Tomorrow books or whatever from like a year ago where they were inverting it. Doc Shaner was appearing before Jeff Lemire and all of that. And it was a nice gesture, I guess, but...
Yeah, I think it's also just kind of, that drives the point home even more. As opposed to doing it line wide, they had a little fiefdom of like 4 books where they're like, I guess we'll give the artists.
These are penciler oriented books or whatever. Yeah, I think we all kind of saw through it.
Yeah, although I will say, you know what, I respect DC for trying a bunch of stuff. Like recently, they have this DC Ink line, DC Zoom. They have the Walmart exclusive books. They've just announced a partnership with Target. Like they're trying things. I don't like everything they're trying, and I don't like the way that they're trying it. Like, some of those DC Ink and DC Zoom books, like the writer's name is the top third, and then at the bottom it says illustrated by so and so. Like that's bullshit to me. Like that sucks. But they're not all that way. There are a couple that are, the books are even, like, the names are even.
Well, on the topic of creator attribution, I feel like it's almost inevitable that we talk about, from what I gleaned from Googling you a couple times, Dave, I know how much you love Stan Lee. It's undeniable. I'm pretty sure you have like a YouTube supercut of all of his cameos just so you can watch those like 7 minutes every day before you go to bed or something like that. That's what
I watch every day before I go to bed. I just watch him going, true believer, true believer, true believer.
So it made me wonder, it made me think, on the flip side of maybe Stan Lee, I say maybe, taking credit for things which he had no business taking credit for, who are some people that you would say are kind of your own personal unsung heroes of comics that you feel are doing a lot of work but maybe aren't being noticed? Are there any people you want to plug?
Yeah, so you're not talking about historical figures, you're talking about people working.
Living or dead. They can be historical if you want them to be. They can be actively working right now. I'm not going to delineate that.
All right. I think, I have so many. So maybe I'll do a couple historical and then a couple modern people. So historical people that I think are deserving of more respect. Number one is Carl Burgos, who's the guy who created the original Human Torch. That Marvel stole, and then Stan Lee literally stole for Fantastic Four stuff. Because Carl Burgos is one of the, I think, pioneering comics illustrators, and that he doesn't really get a lot of credit because he was kind of there before a lot of the things that have gone past comics. But at the time, the Human Torch was a huge deal in comics at the time. It was visually arresting. It's the cover of Marvel Comics #1, for fuck's sake.
Right.
You could make an argument that without him and Bill Everett, there would be no Marvel Comics, because Human Torch and Namor were the flagpoles of the initial Timely / Atlas / Marvel publishing slate. Like they really helped this boom of superhero stuff happen. I think Bill Everett also is just amazing, and I think Bill Everett gets a lot of shit in old timey comics circles, specifically because I don't think he was a very nice man. Like I've read a lot of things about him where he seems kind of like he was an alcoholic and he had some issues as an individual, and I'm not saying that those things aren't true, but I am saying that in this specific case, I think the separation of the art and the artist is always something that's very difficult for me. And not that I'm saying that I can even do it 100% with him, but I think when you look at the work that he was generating in that time period, the level of craft in those illustrations, the level of attention to anatomy, the level of time put in, when most people were like, and I'm not even joking, like literally spending 45 minutes or an hour on a page, and he's making these lavish illustrations where people have rendered fur and like, I think there's something to be said for, if he had been a newspaper strip guy as opposed to a comic book guy, he would have been up there with Milton Caniff and Winsor McKay and all of these very famous and lauded illustrators from that time period. But because he had the misfortune of, falling into the asshole of the universe, which was comics, like he just is nearly completely forgotten, which sucks. Because I think even the common memory of Namor isn't Bill Everett's Namor, it's Jack Kirby's Namor, which I love.
Right.
Like Jack Kirby is obviously another person I would point to, but I feel like everybody knows Jack Kirby's great. Like I'm not, I've done my part in beating the Jack Kirby drum. Like I'm not
right.
In terms of modern people who are deserving of more recognition, I think there's a lot of really cool people making indie comics right now that are self-producing stuff and not waiting for someone else to anoint them as capable of telling their story. And that's something that I personally have struggled with. Like, as I mentioned previously, when I was working on that big, giant, like 150-page book that kind of like made me fall out of love with comics for a minute. That's what I was looking for. Like internally, I wanted someone to anoint me as like, okay, you're officially making comics, because I had been just self-publishing and like dumping time and energy into this void of rejection and no one giving a shit for like whatever that is, 5 years, 10 years. And I have so much respect for people who just don't give a fuck about external validation and march to the beat of their own drum and make their own shit. Specifically, there's an illustrator named Opal Pence who makes a comic called Temmie, which is about an anthropomorphic deer woman in this kind of like fantasy world, and like the majority of the comic is written in a fake language that is like completely made up. And her it's little dots and squiggles and shit, but it's like it's a silent comic where everyone is speaking this other language, and it's really, really cool. Her art style is super idiosyncratic, and very I'm very drawn to comics made by people who look like they're making a comic that has never been influenced by something else. And like her artistic illustration style is like, I don't even know how to describe it. It's kind of like if you took Japanese street fashion and like anthropomorphic 80s cartoons and like Rumiko Takahashi and like shoved them all together in a blender or something, but that doesn't even come anywhere near close to, describing it. I just think she's making really, really rad stuff. Also, there's a guy in Chicago named Matt Allison who's making a book called Kankor, which is just batshit crazy, and I love it so much. It's this kind of weird stream of consciousness deliberation on the nature of creativity, about this like lonesome superhero without a face named Kankor flying through space, basically like thinking about what it means to be creative. And he like fights other versions of himself that are also Kankor, but they're all spelled differently. It's just insane. It's wow. I don't even know how to explain it. And it's all intercut with kind of like autobio short stories of Matt Allison struggling with alcoholism in like the late 90s, early 2000s, and wanting to be a creative person and kind of failing and losing his way. And he gets visited by this character, this Kankor character. And there's a scene in one of the issues where he's at a house party and he's drunk and there's like a band playing and he's kind of being an asshole. And he like looks over in the corner and the Kankor character is like in the house. And he starts crying and he like starts crawling across the floor towards Kankor and he keeps saying like, save me, please save me. And Kankor like just kind of turns away from him and then like dispassionately floats up through the ceiling. And I think that's just such a beautiful metaphor for like what so many people have to go through to make comics.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I could keep going. I don't know how long you want me to keep rambling about dumb shit that I like, but yeah, those are some people that I definitely, whenever she puts out a comic or whenever he puts out a comic, I immediately buy it. Oh, also Kelly Kwang. I think Kelly Kwang is one of the most brilliant illustrators currently living. She did an issue of Frontier, and she has a fashion line of t-shirts and sweatshirts and apparel called Space Cadets, Youth Space Cadets. And I just think that her graphic sensibility, her understanding of the language of visual mechanics that have a crossover in comics, like computer screens, video game stuff, anime influenced figures and fashion. Like I love Kelly Kwang's work as well. I think I wish she was a bazillionaire. I wish she had 75 trillion followers on Instagram.
Gotcha. I mean, that kind of leads into something that I was going to ask. I mean, it sounds like you're talking about a lot of like self-published folks, people that are distributing like online, or maybe at conventions. Like, what's your mindset when you're going from like a big convention like something like C2E2 where there's just this massive amount of people to maybe smaller press events like an SPX or something like that? I don't know what your convention scene is like. Could you maybe like talk us through like how you tour across the country with that kind of stuff?
Oh, yeah, sure. Yeah, so, as I previously said, Nicole and I make stuff together. We've published probably about 12 comics, graphic novel-y things, whatever you want to call them. I really hate that term, but, 12 perfect bound books, I guess, or something. I don't know, whatever. And so, yeah, we tour. A couple years ago, we did like 40 fucking shows in 1 year.
Oh, my God.
Which was,
Jeez.
Oh, my Lord.
Yeah, it sucked. Now we pull it back now. Nicole's doing a big project for a big work for hire project for one of the big two that just got announced. She's drawing a Shadow of the Batgirl for DC Comics.
Cool.
I saw the promo for that. Yeah.
Yeah. She's so partly due to that because when it comes to do you want to tour across the country or do you want to actually make the thing, like she's drawing that and then I'm drawing a book right now, so we both have chosen to maybe go from 40 shows to like 15 shows.
A little more manageable.
Sure.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, we do a mix of things. We do a bunch of the Reed Pop shows like Emerald City, New York, Chicago. We do Heroes Con. And then we do a bunch of the kind of like more indie centric shows like Small Press Expo, Toronto Comics Arts Festival, Vancouver Comics Arts Festival, LA Zine Fest, and then of course we have a big booth at San Diego Comic-Con, which is kind of the Super Bowl of comics, for better or for worse.
Right.
Did I answer your question? I feel like I'm just rambling.
Yeah, no. I think that like hits it because if you're doing a mix, I guess like the second part of that is what's your approach for those cons? Is it always like the same? Are you still presenting things the same way you would at San Diego versus SPX, or are you bringing different stuff for the different audiences? Because I know that those are like very different crowds in some cases. Yeah,
they really are, and I think the thing. I think it's basically the same setup. We bring all the same stuff, more or less. Some shows we bring more apparel, some shows we bring less apparel, because I don't know if you guys have ever tried to lug T-shirts and sweatshirts across the country, but it's kind of a bummer.
Yeah.
But I think the main thing with that stuff is like at indie shows, there's less of a like a street preacher mentality and more of a, hey, you already like these things, let me just tell you about my thing. You know, like at Emerald City, I love Emerald City, and it is a very book-oriented crowd, but it's a mainstream venue, and there's a lot of people there who are just there to fucking see Jason Momoa. And that's great. I want them to get their picture with Jason Momoa, but then I want them to come to Artist Alley, and I want to talk to them and convince them that comics is the greatest art form ever created, and this is why they should read mine. And I'm very passionate about that. And I, sometimes in Artist Alley, it's a hard gig. It's physically debilitating. You're not sleeping. You're not eating. And a lot of people just want to sit there and like have people come to them. And I'm very proactive about it. And Nicole and I always stand. We always hand people books. We always say, hey, hi, my name's Dave. This is what I made. This is why I made it. And I think you might like it. Or, if it's obviously not something somebody wants, I'm not going to cold pitch them because I'm not like a fucking car salesman,
Yeah.
But that's when Dave gets out from behind his booth and starts following you around to other booths because everyone loves that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I've been on both sides of that, I've had that happen where people are really aggressively trying to convince me that their comic is just like what I need in my life is Vampire Back Pussy Slayer or whatever. And I'm like, man, this isn't what I like. Please leave me alone. So I get it, but I also think there's something to be said for the fact that we have so much opportunity at these conventions right now because it is so much of a quote unquote mainstream thing. And there's so many people who don't know anything about comics and would love comics if they just were exposed to the right one, that I take it very seriously. And I try to comport myself with a sense of responsibility of that the medium needs more representatives, like the medium itself needs people to go out and literally be a street preacher and say, look, like this is the highest art form that we've arrived at in America. Like it's an endemically American art form. And because of Frederick Wortham and the fucking HUAC trials in the fucking 50s, like it just got fucked. And it's our responsibility to try and breathe new life into it because it's such an immediate thing. Anybody, anywhere can make a comic. Like if you have a piece of paper and a fucking pencil, you can make a comic and that thing could go on to be your lasting legacy. Like think about how many fine art painters made a drawing or a painting that went on and is now in the Louvre, Fucking Van Gogh didn't sell a single painting in his entire life. And now he's like the most famous artist in the world. And my goal is that someday there will be a story like that for comics, because right now the medium is in a growing pains situation where it's at, for a long time, comics was struggling with the art versus commerce debate, of like, well, comics that are in black and white don't sell. Well, comics that don't have Spider-Man in them don't sell. And now we're seeing things like Raina Tegelmeyer and Dave Pickley's comics selling millions and millions and millions of copies, and people realize that there is money in it. And now is a real like concrete opportunity to change hearts and minds and to go out and be like, hey, comics are the fucking best. You should read them. Housewife in Des Moines, like there's a comic for you somewhere. Like there's not just a comic, there are multiple comics, and yeah, I feel very passionate about the fact that the medium got a short change for a really long time, and we're finally at a place culturally where people are a little bit more accepting of it, and I think we need to seize the day. Carpe diem, motherfucker, read some comics.
Yeah.
I think I agree with you 100%. And it was interesting going to Emerald City and getting that vibe. I think as someone that grew up reading comics at the speculator boom in the early 90s and seeing the almost collapse completely as a result of that, like going through Artist Alley, seeing your books, seeing the variety stuff out there, I feel like in some senses, maybe not in terms of money being generated, but in terms of content, comics are healthier than they've ever been. Like it's such an exciting time to be a fan, but what's that next step? How do you get people that aren't already tuned into that aware of them? And I think that's kind of the struggle you're hinting at there.
Yeah, it definitely is. But I think also like the graphic novel market is a billion-dollar industry. Like
right,
the direct market has problems with a capital P. Like that shit is fucked.
Yeah.
I don't know what you're talking about, Dave.
Like I'm not saying that everything is perfect and that we live in a a perfect world, but like there's a small part of me that's just like, if the direct market dies, fuck it, whatever. We have a bunch of Spider-Man comics. Who gives a shit? Like, I want to see the new things. I want to see, Raina Tegelmeyer is awesome, but what comes after that? Like, I was reading on the beat, like, last year, Dave Pickley's Dogman comic sold like 2.7 million copies.
Yeah.
And in terms of mainstream media, that's nothing. Like, that's not even like one Marvel movie, but still it's a fucking book and it's a comic, and it's changing the perception for the next generation. And that's so exhilarating to me, because as somebody who grew up with, like, I can distinctly remember going to the doctor and having to talk to the doctor about health stuff, and then be like, oh yeah, what do you do? I'm like, oh, I'm a comics artist. And he goes, oh, that's a lost art. And it's like,
Jesus.
Like, are you fucking kidding me? They come out every Wednesday. Like, every Wednesday they come out. Like, I feel like I haven't gotten that, oh, that's a lost art in a long time. And I never want anyone who is trying to make comics or be creative to ever hear, oh, your thing doesn't matter. Like, if there's a fucking, like, crochet network of, like, people who are trying to make cool, weird crochet bullshit, I want the culture to be like, oh yeah, that's cool. Crocheting is dope. Like, I don't know anything about crochet. I just picked this at random, but I just feel like culturally, America I want us to be more open to that kind of stuff, and not just think that movies are the only art form that matters.
Definitely.
Yeah, I really appreciate that you're sort of kind of shifting the framework of success and the future of comics, because I feel like for the past couple years, whenever anybody asks, like, what is the future of comics? How can we ensure that there is a future of comics? Like, where does that come from? It's this idea that, like, well, the Marvel movies are successful, so all we have to do is get all of those people to go home and buy a Spider-Man trade. And then people are asking, well, is that happening? And then the results come back and they seem to suggest, well, no, it's not happening. And so I appreciate that you're saying that is not the one supposed path to a future. That's not the one supposed path to an insured existence. Like, I completely agree that it's like a lot of this money, a lot of these copies, it's all scholastic.
And also Kickstarter. Like, you look at what Spike Trotman has done. Like, she's raised over $1 million to print comics that most quote-unquote prestige publishers would think were empirically non-commercial. Gay romance stories, porn, comics that look like they were made by someone on the internet. Like, most of the time, Image, Marvel, DC, you name it, they're going to think that is anathema to their current reader base, because their reader base is fucking, aging white dudes. But comics can be so much more than that. And I love the fact that Spike has gone out and blazed a trail and said, fuck all of that shit, I'm going to do it myself. And now we're seeing people like Ryan Sands, like Kevin Chapp, like all my publisher for Fuck Off Squad, Silver Sprocket. Like, there are all these people who started as an individual and were like, I really like this specific thing, I'm going to put it out and see what happens. And then it gains a little bit of a following, and then you're able to parlay that into a somewhat mover shaker in the indie comics space. And I think that I wish we had 50 more C. Spike Trotmans and 50 more, Silver Sprockets, because they're doing good work, and they're each in their own specified lane. Like, if you're like this last weekend, we were at LA Zine Fest, and this young person, probably I don't know how old they were, probably 15, came up to the table, and they were like, hey, I read Fuck Off Squad, I loved it so much. They talked to us for 15 minutes about it, and I was like, oh, what other comics do you read? And they said, oh yeah, I just read Silver Sprocket comics. That's it, period. That's all I care about, because they speak to my, like, anti-capitalist punk rock roots. That's all I give a shit about, is like just Silver Sprocket stuff. And I wish that there was so many more stories like that. Like, so many of these larger publishers are so concerned with they're so concerned with IP mining and fucking over creators and taking movie rights on the off chance that one of their books becomes marginally successful, so they can parlay it into a shitty Hulu series, that nobody's publishing comics with an actual identity and a voice and something to say. And I think that's vital for the sustained health of the medium, is to make shit that's unlike anybody else. Like, if there's a comic that doesn't look like any other comic, that's a reason to publish it.
Right.
Not a reason not to publish it.
Well, speaking of that, books that don't feel or look like anything else, do you want to maybe give us a rundown of Action Hospital? I don't think we've spent much time talking about that. Want to give us the elevator pitch, so to speak?
Yeah. So Action Hospital is kind of like, I always describe it as Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind meets Venture Brothers set in a hospital. So it's about a place that services otherworldly people and things with extreme needs. It's kind of about grief, trauma, depression, trying to move through things, and then dumb shit like werewolf koalas, 10-headed demons,
hell yeah,
laser swords,
hell yeah,
the good stuff. And there's 3 200+ page volumes. The initial volume, Future's a Strange Place, I wrote the entirety of, and I drew about half of, and the other characters in the hospital, every illustrator is paired with an artist, and whenever they show up, they're always, whenever the character shows up, they're always drawn by the same person. So sometimes there's like all 6 of us drawing on one page together. So I draw a character named Joan Michelle Basquiat, who's kind of a nurse in the hospital who's trying to navigate if she really wants to work in this hospital where her dad got her this job, or if she wants to leave and try and become a musician. And then there's probably about 7 other characters who are paired with individual illustrators. The individual illustrators include Robert Negretti, Nicole Gu, Clay Merle, Sabrina Diegert. I know I'm forgetting people.
The guy with the Kirby style that I can't.
Oh yes, Jake. Yes. J.H. Hammer. JQ Hammer. Jesus Christ, my friend's name, and I can't remember his name. JQ Hammer. Yeah, there's a bunch of them, and I'm apologizing to everyone right now who I forget. Kat Yee, Nick Diaz, a bunch of other people. Doesn't matter. I mean, it does matter, but you know what I'm saying. Like everybody, everybody works in tandem, and they draw their own character. And most of the characters, they have they have kind of like an arc through the book. And I drew the entirety of the second book all myself. It's about 275 pages. And then the third book, I penciled the entirety of, and Erwin Papa, who's a very gifted illustrator, he inked it all and did a great job. Yeah.
Wowzer.
How long did it take you to draw issue 17? Because reading that issue, I was getting stressed for you because of. I was like, with every page, I was like, "Oh my god, there's more crowd." Dave, what's going on? There's more crowds in this page.
Yeah. I like drawing crowd scenes. There is something about the monastic side of creating comics that I find very addicting, where I love and I also hate it. I love and hate I'm gonna now not sleep for 3 days and draw this massive crowd scene, and when I am done, I'm gonna step back and be like, that looks fucking dope.
Well, it must be so different when it's something that you've, I guess, self-imposed as opposed to asking someone else to do it. I guess.
Yeah, I would. Yeah,
that must be that's a real, difference there.
Yeah, if I ever worked with a writer and they were like, draw a crowd scene, I'd be like, no, I don't want to do that. No.
I didn't receive this email. Let's try this again. Yeah.
Yeah. That issue was really fun to draw, partly because of the crowd scene stuff, and then also partly because of the layouts in that issue. I feel like that was the beginning of the kind of like, I do a lot of work with tons of small panels.
I was going to say, like, you really love inset panels, I could tell. I was like, Dave, what's going on here too? I was like, that's... I mean, when I saw that, it instantly made me think of Andrea Sorrentino did the same thing with like Green Arrow. There was so many of those, and I was like, reminds me of that. Yeah,
one of the things that I kind of don't like about comics is that when something is writer driven, you tend to get comics that are a grid, and I love grids. And the comic I'm making right now is a full, like the whole thing is 9-panel grids. But there's something to be said for the medium has more to offer than a 9-panel grid. Like it's like, or just grids in general. I really like density, and I like kind of almost like a wall of sound approach. Like I know Matt Fraction in the supplemental materials on Casanova talks about how Phil Spector's approach to producing records, where it was a wall of sound, where you would have multi tracks of maybe even the same instrument playing the same note, just to kind of overwhelm the viewer. There is something, or the listener, there's something about that where whatever it is about that kind of sensation that really clicks with me. Like some of my favorite comics are, hyper dense, hyper detailed, Jeff Darrow-esque.
You must like James Stokoe then.
Right.
Love Stokoe. I love Brian Talbot's early work. I love anybody, J.H. Williams III. Like I love his kind of like shotgun approach to double page spreads, where everything has, the panels are very design oriented, and there's a flow to them, and they work at a 100,000 foot view, a 30,000 foot view, and right, with your face against the page. There's something to be said for. I love when you can feel the person on the other end of the page, like shunting all of their energy through the page at you. It's almost kind of the opposite of somebody who's just kind of showing up and they are drawing the scene, but there's no internal momentum. There's no kind of like personal identity in the drawing of a face. And that's something that I try and strive for a lot. Is like, what is the maximalist version of this idea? Even if it's a small, intimate moment, like in that same issue, I think it's 17, the one where Joan picks up the guitar at the end of it. There's a big, like, kind of S shape that's made out of all these little panels that she's like plucking a guitar, and there's all these little, like, this giant kind of cloud of serpentine panels coming up out of the guitar. And there's something, like, each one of those panels means something to me, because, spoiler alert, for better or for worse, basically I am Joan. And there's that comic is a really personal comic for me, and I put a lot of myself and my experiences and my hopes and fears and desires for the world into Action Hospital. And the visual representation of all of those things is like a coded message. And my goal, I guess, in making comics is that there's almost like these comics serve as a Rosetta Stone for who I am as a person. And so, years after I'm gone, somebody will find this in a dusty back issue bin somewhere and be like, oh, wow, look at this motif of this ear. I wonder where this ear comes from. I wonder if this is based on somebody. I wonder who this person is, and then try and do research and figure out who the fuck that ear is based on. Or you know what I mean? Like that's maybe that's a self-aggrandizing way of looking at things, but it definitely making a Rosetta Stone for who I am as a person is not an inappropriate summation of most of my work.
Gotcha.
Interesting. Huh.
Well, we've got so many other questions here, but we are recording so long. We're running out of digital tape here on the internet. I hate to cut this short. Dave, we'll have to have you come back to answer the rest of these questions we've got, because man, oh man, you've only sparked more questions in my head about the stuff that you're working on. Can you tell us a little bit about the project you have coming up before we wrap things up here?
Yeah, sure. I'm working on a comic called Mary Tyler Moorhawk. It's a girl adventurer, kind of Nancy Drew style comic, kind of in the vein of Ashen Hospital stuff, but a little bit more standalone. It's its own self-contained 4-issue miniseries. I am towards the end of issue 4, making it right now. I'm writing and drawing it, and It's all 9-panel grids because I basically did the same. I did the reverse of what we just talked about, where I started seeing the stylistic proclivities of when I would use those, kind of like tons and tons of panels, and I was like, I'm gonna take that away from myself and see what it does. So the whole thing more or less is 9-panel grids, and I'm very excited about it.
Cool, man. Well, where can people try to find that stuff when it comes out? Is it just all on your website or somewhere else?
I honestly, I don't know yet. It's either going to be picked up by a publisher or I'm going to do a Kickstarter for it. One of the two.
Gotcha.
We'll see. Because even though I'm almost done drawing it, then I have the laborious task of lettering it and coloring it and dealing with it. It's for better or for worse. It's a long fucking road to make comics.
Yeah. Well, very cool. Well, I look very much forward to checking that out when it comes out, as well as actually picking up a copy of Action Hospital, which I thought I did. So I'm sorry. I'll read it and I'll get back to you, Dave, and we'll have you come back and we can talk more about it. But I guess for the people out there who want to get a hold of you or check out the rest of your stuff, where can they find you on the internet?
Yeah, you can find me either on my website, heydavebaker.com, or on Instagram, xdavebakerx, where I post time lapses and progress drawings for Mary Tyler Moorhawk, the book that I'm working on right now. Yeah.
Cool. And then keep an eye out at your local comic convention because Dave may be there.
I definitely will be. Yeah.
That sounds great. Well, I guess you can follow the rest of the show on Twitter. You can follow Nick at Death Star Plans. You can follow Paul at Oh Hi Paulie. You can follow me at Mike Rappin, and you can follow the show at IRCB Podcast, where I've been trying to post all sorts of fun stuff. And don't forget to check out our zine. It's got a beautiful, beautiful cover by Shannon Murphy. I really, really love it. If you haven't seen it, I posted on our Instagram on Friday, I think. It's absolutely wonderful, and you can get that at ircbpodcast.com/zine.
You can also check out patreon.com/ircbpodcast. Thank you everybody that's supporting us over there. Your support really does help the show survive. If you join, you can get access to our Patreon-only episodes, including Mike and Paul read Doom Patrol, so that's really enjoyable over there. And get access to our top of our pile lists and so much more. Also, check out our Goodreads group. It's a community of comic book friends who talk about comics, what they've been reading, what they're excited to read, and this week's thread was discussing Beautiful Darkness, which was last month's book of the month. You can also check out ircbpodcast.com. That's where we have show notes, links to every episode, merchandise, zines you can buy, and most importantly, our comic book creator pronunciation guide. So check that out over there.
We would really, really love it if you would go ahead and rate and subscribe, whether it's on Stitcher, whether it's on Apple Podcasts. Tell your friends about the show, share the show. If you haven't rated, why not? It really, really helps us move up the ranks and have a higher visibility on all of these different sites. We would also love it if you would email the show at ircb@destroythecybe.org if you have comments, if you have questions, if you have jokes. Anything of that sort, send it over to that email address.
Infinity Shred does all the music for our show. They are the best band in the universe. We can't thank them enough for letting us use their music. You can check out their new stuff at infinityshred.com or on Bandcamp. Xander is the highest level of wizard, the nicest person in the world, and he's also a great Dungeons and Dragons master. I will say he's just fantastic all around. He also edits the show, but I wanted to make sure I called him out for all that other stuff. I want to say thank you to Paul and Nick for being on the show this week, and extra special thanks to Dave for coming and chatting with us. We're really, really happy that you were able to make it to be on the show this week, so thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Well, until next time, comic books are good, and so are you.